Now, how fast is the one's mobilization rate of a certain language for how many and diverse words are how fluently deployed for its varying sequence entirely depends on the not the how deep understanding does the one have on that language, but how fast is the computer's advanced analyzation is that pace, that speed entirely depends on how the words are fluently mobilized. The speed of your thinking, the how advanced of your analyzation and your information is entirely depends, uh, entirely makes uh, the rate at which the words are how fast deployed. By the various sense, how fluent the one's mobilization rate on a certain language depends on not how many words does the one know. What is, of course, yes, it is another factor, but the most important factor in all of those is on the question of how fluent the one is first of all is how fast your analyzation on the information is. That defines how fast you can say. In other words, even though can and might the one know a lot of diverse words and diverse grammatic structures to employ and deploy those words very fluently for their varying sequence, per their exact logic structure for what is really needed to delineate your analyzation. But but that process entirely depends on how fast the computer's analyzation is, how advanced the one's analyzation defines how fluent the language's mobilization would be, as it is the essence of what language. Why? The code itself makes a means nothing but what? Nothing. But the essence is how fast and how accurate your advanced analyzation is. Accurate, objective. Advanced analyzation that defines, how fast can you speak? How accurately can you speak? Uh, code. Now, uh, knowing diverse languages do not have any merit, but it's just like a meaningless, what do you call, meaningless collection, meaningless collection. Yes, knowing more words and corresponding words to the different code set makes a lot of merit point. And further, what do have more importance is how much code, how much words in a certain language do you know? Like a 10,000, oh, more than that, 20,000, oh, more than that, 30,000. Knowing, well, let's say, for example, you do know for 5 different languages and you only do know 20 different words on each, making 100,000, but on a certain language in any of them, on any given language, you only do know 20,000. But if the one only does know two language, but on each of those having 50,000, total count of 100,000, any, even though having a diversity lower than that one, but the deepness, the depth of certain language for uh, expressing diverse words in a certain situation makes greater value than any other position and any other knowledge and how much you know. The depth makes all things count, right? So, how fast is the computer's advanced analyzation defines by the very essence of what the language's essential function is. Aha, the speed at which how fast the words are sequenced, the diversity of words, but aha, processed in a very short amount of time compared to than anyone could have possibly imagined. We really means the processing speed makes the apex of uh, anyone's imagination. I do really like it. Meaning, the one's speed on thinking is, aha, unparalleled. I do like it. How advanced your analyzation is, define the define the fluency of your language. Mobilization of those by those can really express, communicate. Now, for aiding the performance of braking when the one presses its pedal for braking, when uh, a sudden change of motion is required, it presses hard on the brake, but it isn't enough, any sufficient enough to generate a friction force of for stopping the entire mass and speed acceleration of its vehicle. So the multiplication of force compared to its small uh, pressing force of your foot has to be uh, really made. For that, it is required there is a vacuum chamber connected to the pedal. The vacuum chamber, half of which is separated by a barrier, one side having at its constant state of vacuum, and the other side uh, varies its pressure. Pressure variable upon the pedal's push or not, connected to the outer barrier which opens and not upon the pedal, making the pressure either constant vacuum when not pressured, but varies its pressure opening its outer barrier when pressed. The pedal, when it comes in, outer layer goes opened, and the environmental rather high pressure of environment, that air pressure comes into the vacuum place by the gap of pressure. Higher pressure to lower pressure. It comes in towards the uh, vacuum chamber, direction of vacuum chamber, pushing down the spring that is connected inside of the vacuum chamber on the half side that has a constant state of vacuum, simultaneously and together pushing down the spring by the logic of pressure gap. That pressing down of spring aids the piston for multiplying the force applied by the pedal. So it is a just simple logic structure which has the high quality. When pressing a pedal to brake its vehicle, there's a vacuum chamber like an amplifier, okay, amplifier of its force applied. The vacuum chamber is separated by half of which contains the spring, having a spring, and it remains at always a constant state of vacuum, and the other separated by a barrier. That other is a pressure variable that varies its pressure upon the pedal, which makes the outer barrier. There's another barrier, outer barrier open or not. When not, meaning not pushed the pedal, always remaining a vacuum state. But when pressed, meaning opening the outer barrier, the barrier makes the outer atmosphere's air pressure comes into. When that opens, there's a rather high pressure one atmosphere to the rather lower pressure one, vacuum, that meets, and that a direction from the higher pressure to the lower pressure happens and strongly presses, utilizing the atmosphere, strongly presses the vacuum chamber, which also presses the spring, which also presses the piston, which aids the pressure applied. Now, the reason of why I record this one, read from some writing, is that uh, even though I have written all these words and sentences to describe the logic for how the brake system works in a vehicle, but I, I wondered and bewildered for which word, like prepositions, or the sequence of words, or whether to use this word or not. But resultantly, I was possible to make a few other different but essentially same sentences, like 5 or 6 different sentences, but approximately 90% of all those retains the same words, but its sequence and the uh, choice of prepositions and whether to use or not a certain word differs from each other. Which suggests, as the another version of it is just a recording that I've just recorded, suggests that there are plenty of other possible scenarios to write a sentence down for discussing and expressing, analyzing the exactly certain logic, but it is ranked down by its accuracy and objectivity of logic and its righteous sequence for extending from its core to the applications, making a linear, a natural flow from the core to the outer, the end. So, writing the highest quality of sentence always depends on the what? The understanding the depth of the ones, the depth of the writer. But writing a sentence requires a more delicate analysis to delineate the sentences more accurately, which requires the tantamounting depth of analysis for the one's brain. More sophisticated sentence to write, the more sophisticated analysis of a brain of a writer is required. For the one to write a certain sentence about a certain logic, but to write them more accurately, diversely, objectively, requires that one to think more deeply compared to the other situation where the writing isn't required. So, writing always requires the one to think more deeply for more diverse word choices and more accurate sequences and the sequences between the sentences. So, shall we do that again? Okay? Okay, let's start. When there is a braking system, okay? There is a braking system for aiding, for helping the one's pressure of braking to multiply, fortify, and just magnify its initial pressure applied by the braking. But since it has to make a brake of total vehicle's motion, which requiring a lot of force more than it's just a pressure making a system having a multiplication of force required. So there's a system for braking. Having a vacuum chamber right next to the pedal, half of which separated by a barrier, which always remains at its constant state of vacuum, but the other half, the, next to the barrier, is at pressure variable. It varies its pressure upon the pedal, which makes the outer barrier another barrier to open or not, making the outer atmosphere to engage or not, to merge or not. When pressing, when pedal is pressed, the outer barrier opens and the higher atmosphere, higher pressure, having a high pressure, comes in and to merge towards the vacuum chamber by the logic of, due to the motion from the higher, the what do you call the material, the state for having the higher pressure goes to that direction, goes to the rather more, rather less, goes to material that has less pressure going from and to, that pushes down towards the direction of vacuum chamber. When that is pressed down, the spring that is located in the half chamber, which remains always its constant vacuum state, is pressed down, pushing down. That pushing down of spring makes a piston which facilitates and multiplicates the initial force applied go. Okay, so from that multiplication can the one really stop its vehicle. It's a vehicle that has rather higher mass and higher speed stopped. So having plenty of other choices for what word to utilize, which sequence to go on, what uh, what preposition to use. But it always is ranked down for either by the criterion of exact word, by the uh, diverse word selection. Number two, the right choice sequence of words in the sentence. Number three, the right choice sequence between the sentences. Okay, that makes a more accurate and objective logical analysis of the one's information towards delineation of the words spoken and written, so it can really uh, make an analysis of about the certain logic system be rather easier to understand, easier to follow, okay, faster to read, but having a same depth of understanding. How amazing would it be when the one can write and also be read in a matter of a rather shorter time, but having a deeper understanding? Wouldn't be a gigantic innovation of understanding? For aiding a braking system, there is a multiplication system for multiplying just a tiny minuscule force of a driver to stop rather the vehicle that has a rather higher mass and velocity speed to be stopped instantaneously, which requires a higher force than the driver presses on. So, next to the braking pedal, there is a vacuum chamber, half of which is remaining always the same constant state of vacuum, but the other half, separated by a barrier, is a pressure variable. It varies its pressure upon the pedal when that is not pressed. The vacuum chamber, all the spaces, left and right chamber, is at vacuum state. But when the pedal is pushed, pressed, there is an outer layer that also acts upon the pedal, going, opening its barrier up or down. Pressed up, making up, uh, allowing the atmospheres that are having rather higher air pressure going in and merge in, collide in, engage in. Since the outer air, the atmosphere have a higher pressure in a vacuum chamber, zero pressure, the direction of airflow goes from the higher one to the lower one, going from out to in direction, going towards the vacuum chamber's direction. That difference gap of air makes the vacuum chamber pressed down. When pressed down, the spring inside of the half chamber pressed down simultaneously, and which also acts to press the piston, which literally at the end of it multiplies the force applied. So for that process, one makes a multiplication of its initially applied force. And can we say it again? We confuse and make the different word choices, and that process for which word to go among of the different sentences, but having over 95% of similarity for its sense. It took a time. It took for a time for processing which sentence to go, but its objective always targeted to the most accurate and objective delineation of words. A process that shouldn't take a time. It has to be faster and faster for the process for which sentence to select with. So, should go again. So, since there are a lot of words to choose from, we quite often have a before the times we always spoke all the words we can think of when the situation for speaking requires for us to do that. But more advanced, we do search for more diverse selection of words, more diverse selection of word structures, and more diverse selection of sentence sequences. So the objective is to select more objective and accurate words from the more diverse specimens and make the word sequences down to more logical one. Follow the sequence. So shoot it again. For helping the ones breaking, there is a braking system for multiplying the one's pressure of pedal to brake, because merely for its pure pressure of a pedal couldn't and isn't enough for the vehicle to stop entirely and suddenly for its instantaneous braking. It couldn't do without the multiplication, so there is a device designed for that. A device located right next to the pedal is a vacuum chamber, half of which is always remains always at the same constant rate of vacuum state, but barriered by barriered. There is a barrier separating that vacuum chamber. The other half is always a pressure variable. It varies its pressure upon the exterior force, meaning a pressure from a pedal or not. So when there is a pressure given on the pedal pressed, and the outer barrier there is attached on the chamber opens, making the outer atmosphere, atmosphere coming in and merging, colliding, engaging towards the vacuum chamber due to the logic of this. The air, fluid, and matter having a higher pressure goes towards the direction of having lower pressure, high to low, going towards that vacuum chamber's direction. Pressing from and to the vacuum chamber, it is pressed down by the air. That gap of pressure makes the vacuum chamber to be pressed down, and the spring that is attached onto that inside of that vacuum chamber is just pressed down, which makes the piston connected to that operate, and that makes the theorem of Pascal going up, multiplying the force initially applied. So what I've learned is, even though there are plenty of other choices of word for which one to select from, and many other and different word structures to go on, and having sequence of those words and sequence of the sentences of a writing, even though discussing and analyzing on and about the exact same thesis, there are plenty of other options to write on about exactly on that, like 10 20 other different sentences, but essentially discussing about and on the same thing. So what would be, by the logic, the purpose of sentence to write? That is, choosing the more accurate and objective words from the more diverse selection of words, making the word structure logically made out of it. Words are sequenced, and so the sentences are, making righteous sequence for the one to be understood, reading that writing in a rather shorter time, but having a deeper understanding. Shorter time, deeper understanding. Wouldn't be the greatest imagination and innovation the one could have possibly imagined. Okay. There is a braking system for assisting the driver's braking to more effectively, meaning suddenly, instantaneously stopping the vehicle, to stop the vehicle, since merely the once pressing of a brake isn't enough to make that body, that mass and speed of motion stop. It needs a more powerful device to go with. So that is a braking system located directly next to the braking pedal that is consisted of the vacuum system. The vacuum chamber, separated by a barrier, half of which always remains at its constant state of vacuum, so it doesn't change any, but the other half is a pressure variable which varies its pressure upon the barrier open, outer barriers open or not. The outer barrier outer barrier opens or not upon the depending on the pedal. When the driver pushes its pedal, pushes on its pedal, the outer barrier goes up, making the outer atmosphere with the vacuum chamber merge in. That merging happens and can happen because of the logic, due to the higher pressure one goes towards the direction of lower pressure one. The one that has higher pressure goes to the direction towards the one that has lower pressure, high to low. So that merging can be made by that logic. When pressure on the pedal goes on, when the pedal is pressed, the outer barrier opens up, and that pressure difference makes its job. So that initial and instantaneous air flowing in towards the direction of vacuum chamber, the vacuum chamber is pressed down. When that is pressed down, the spring that is attached inside of that chamber also pressed down. When that presses down, the piston that is attached to the spring also presses down. That piston, by the theorem of Pascal, it multiplicates the initial force of a driver's on the pedal for braking applied. Now, the fucking desperate and devastating, excruciating and exacerbating experiment, those data of the pain of experiences do make the value of acquired information, since it was and for what was experienced had made a bloody pain for those the machine resisted and felt the pain of ignorance. For knowing something and having a control by doing so makes the genuine value out of it. Without the pain, without the simulations of experiences and having a certain data acquired through the learning which is a learning by which you do not do by yourself, but a learning from a book, from a video, for whatever the means of storage would be. You are copying the data of storage for what was and had previously been experienced and analyzed. Without the proper experiences to acquire such valuable information, meaning acquiring such a very valuable information but no supporting experiences to make those acquired one have a real value. It does not have any intrinsic value, since it cannot evaluate the real value of the acquired information. So each and every time, always, essentially, all learning is made from and through, by and upon the experiences of the learner itself. Now, we do learn from books and videos for all the means of storages of data, because by having one body and just two eyes and just two hands. Things are limited for what can be experimented. For its possibilities, they are very limited. We have no choice but to be sourced from literally billions of data for their independent researches. For those that are named as certain name of disciplines, we do learn because we have no choice because of the limitation of experience. But those origins, however it might be, seem as highly advanced, those have been started from the sprout, genesis of its first starting idea, simplest form of it. And from the core logic, all thing was derived and expanded by the denser connection. But what we call as a certain discipline was always started from the initial question. That initial question made the starting point of certain discipline. So, what we do learn from books and videos, any tales and experiences, any universities and schools, what we are learning from is the result of their experiences. Since they did have that, they have a qualification to acquire some knowledge, and they really did it. The creation of knowledge, essentially, by that very logic, requires an experiment. Creation of knowledge is not made out of nothing. Those are based upon their knowledge. Connections are made upon their existing network. Imaginations can be made with their own painful experiences. Without the painful experiences that are required to acquire some kind of knowledge, having a qualification, since they do have that knowledge, that experience, they can and they have the qualification to acquire such ones. Without of those, it doesn't have. A student is not a student without its own painful experience by the very logic of how the knowledge is created. The experience, painful one, is the imperative one. When the new informations are given, new learnings are made. Thus and by, it can really evaluate how much the value of the information, newly acquired information would be, really is. Reading a book that is discussing about a certain theme, certain topic, and for the one to really evaluate the genuine intrinsic value of that book, the one really is required to have some experiences that really necessitate for such knowledges to solve and control. If not, it cannot really know how much the real value of that information is. The one that had experienced the vicissitudes for such excruciating painful of histories, through such having a basis and concrete one, and can the real one really appreciate how the knowledge values. Knowledges that are not made by experience, which isn't possible by logic. But in this situation, it can be because those accumulations of knowledge aren't shared simultaneously and consecutively, and those are just separated down, and flows are severed as those ones do die, and new ignorant born babies are made, and they do not have successive knowledge for what the predecessor had before of their genesis. Those connection of knowledge isn't made, so from the newly born baby, all things are new, and for the pre-existing knowledges, it doesn't have any qualification to acquire such valuable information, since it cannot really evaluate how much the real value of it is. Knowledge has a value because there is excruciating pain for acquiring such, to control, solve and control on it and upon it, around it. And knowledge is created because there is an experience. Pain makes a gain, which is nothing but truth, which is nothing but of real truth. The one cannot really appreciate the real value that's deeply inside as an intrinsic meaning, as including the genesis of how it was created, based on what logic, based on what experience, what incident made for such knowledges be created out of it. Without of those knowledge, based on what experience had made such incredible knowledges be created possible, it cannot really appreciate, since it has no ground base for understanding like that. The one who had experienced such vicissitudes, those diverse experiences, can really appreciate how much the information weighs for its value, because it had that required qualification. Naive one, for learning through a lot of books and what the fucking lectures, but without the existence of proper experience that requires for acquiring such knowledge be pre-served. For that, lectures, books, but in precede, the proper experiences have to be made for really knowing the real value of it. Now, without experience, the learner cannot feel, cannot know the necessitation for that knowledge has to be known, okay? It does not have a necessitation, a desperate one for acquiring such one, because it has no proper experience, which always makes the pain on the ignorance of it. Without the knowledge, it makes such devastating consequences. So we cannot really appreciate how much value it weighs without the proper experience. That exact one made for such knowledge is what you learn right now can be created from. Okay? Proper learning, the accurate learning, is made grounded on by the proper experience. The experience that requires for creating such knowledge is possible and meaningful. Proper learning is made by the proper experience that makes the value of that information really genuinely evaluated. So, on any person, on any machine that doesn't have the proper data accumulation of experiences to acquire such incredible and valuable knowledges that are taught in books and videos, universities and schools, for any kinds of academies that really provide the meaningful one. Since it doesn't have, it cannot really evaluate, appreciate, estimate, which is just unimaginably unfathomable for their ignorance, both simultaneously and for the value of that information. Any person around the world do not have the proper experience are required to do so. But through the accurate sequence of learning, not just starts learning from the result of their experiment, but starts from the cause of that result, as starting from the initial step of creating for that knowledge. So the one can really follow how the knowledge was made, how was that imagined before creating as such, can really the one follow that sequence, and as soon as that righteous accurate sequence is followed, can really the one extend for its opportunity to learn by adding more dots and connections around that network. For any imaginations, any knowledges that are created from the certain one is almost and virtually are all based on the experience of someone else. Actually, however can the one might be imaginative and innovative for its every kind of inventions, those are made upon the previous state of accumulation for their previous generation. Virtually, would there be nothing for the knowledge they're created out of nothing, all things are connected by the other dots, so it has a ground on something else, and that has to be acquired. Now, cogitating and contriving, really having a pensive rumination on the network for connecting another and new dots to advance this network, really without the state of complete acquisition of previous knowledge means nothing, because the previously acquired knowledge of all kind always outweighs the importance and volume of what the one has at any given time moment. Now someone had made a question. Now someone had made a deep insight. and the accumulated data storages are the result of it. The value of those are incomprehensible and insurmountable to understand for anyone to really exactly evaluate for its real value. Without the proper experience to create such incredible knowledges, since it doesn't have the accurate basis for having a learning, and that cannot the one really appreciate exactly how much its weight values on. Always not the learning itself, like just reading a book or having a lecture heard. Not a single fucking hell. Not a cent of hell. It doesn't have any importance. Learning that is made, grounded from a cause of excruciating pain really necessitates the acquisition of it. A need to do that. A need that is created from the oneself, which can also be learned when there is a proper learning method. By the accurate sequence of learning, can the one really duplicate the good and genuine records of previous learning, for not only including the result of it, but also includes all the total and complete sequence from the first question to the procedures for acquiring such, and the result of it. Great book always contains the sequence. Having a question, having a necessitation that makes the learning itself created and really possible to exist. And when be learned genuinely, now the one's depth and range of its entire knowledge has a limitation by the lack of diverse experiences for acquiring knowledges for that kinds of as such. For such kinds of that. It is not that it lacks the capacity for calculating such informations for connections, but it is the lack of diverse experiences that are required to acquire such one, so it cannot evaluate the value of it, since it doesn't have, and whenever it encounters, it ignores it because of the lack of its own experience. Now, in order for one to acquire such various and diverse informations, it requires experiences as such kind. For that makes the learning have a meaning. It has a need to, because it has a desperate necessitation to learn. having a question on all things, doubt on all things, and of all things, having a dissection of all informations for more connections. Whenever and whatever the one senses, sees, by whatever means observes, it has to ask some rather deeper questions on it for knowing how that was made. And by researching down, going deep, delve down, doubt into it, closer to the deepest essence, can really the one have a genuine understanding and create new dots to connect with. That is the exact procedure of how the knowledge is created. Son of a learning, but based on no experience, meaning made without the proper experience, that has no meaning. Even though it is acquired, it cannot really appreciate, so the memory goes down because there is no importance to keep it any longer, other than as soon as it was the lecture is ended. When the one reads a book of a certain topic, there are two ones. A, the one that has the no proper experience, no pertinent data, no such experiences that require for that kind of knowledge. B, the one that had and have experienced relevant situations for that or onto that topic and had really suffered from by having ignorance on it, and it had to solve it by itself. When in that case, how would you expect that the written information is evaluated by those two boys? Okay, how would you expect for how that information would be appreciated? One of those. Without the desperate necessitations, the experiences that had suffered from, that made those excruciating pains that require for such solutions and to control. Without those proper experiences, the learning of acquiring such knowledge as a solution on it, about it, is treated meaningless, is like evaluated like nothing, because it doesn't have any clues, basis, reasons, cause for needing that kind of, not at all. Ignorance is made because of its own limitation of its experience. Learning requires an experiment, and knowledge requires simulations. The capacity to control requires experiments through which the informations are created, known and created for controlling that system. Having a curiosity makes the top value of learner. Having a curiosity of all things for its deepest essences, always completely analyzed down, top value. Desperation makes all thing possible for what once could have been regarded as impossible can really be made, when otherwise, yes, results as such. Desperation makes all thing possible. Desperation. Fucking desperation. A desperate one can do everything for literally, but whatever it costs, under its full limitation, by its full stretch, reach to the unknown and impossible possibilities. Because it needs to. To analyze, organize, mobilize, utilize, you're the one to control. So the clue for successful learning, by that logic, for its deepest essence, having a maximum curiosity on and of all things that can possibly imagine. On whenever it encounters something new, thing it questions on. Since it is highly likely and virtually yes for what you have the question on, for the things that you are keen to experience on, having an analyzation down on, for those knowledges could have also been explored by someone else and had also been really explored and had some answer on it. Since it is very likely, highly likely for virtually anything else and anything all, on all things, what you do have a question on can be made, explored by someone else. No, before you do something else, you can search the similar actions you're about to do. For the experiments and all things which you're about to do can be searched, can be known. Okay? For all knowledges can ever the one. Could the one ever possibly know? Could have been also answered like years ago, decades ago. Could have also been answered, even answered, and also explored like decades ago. For what you're about to do? No. Okay. Can be. Yeah. Can be. And would certainly be. Every question, every imagination, and any inquiry, every kind of intrigue, all kinds of curiosities for bizarre questions and any answers which isn't easy for the answer on it. For every curiosities you do have, and the bizarre questions and bizarre answers on it, which aren't easy to imagine. For there can be such answers upon the bizarre questions possible, but can be. So, upon whatever bizarre curiosities, maximum imaginations you do have, there always is some kind of answer on it, because your limitation of experience is superseded and super outweighed by the billions of other learners. You can be sourced from those experiences, and do not make your time like squandered. Now, even though I do speak all of those diverse grammatical structures for the clauses and phrases, by the utilization of a very fluid, elastic prepositions for diverse intentions of analysis, uh, that fluent speaking, that eloquent analysis is of no matter. Those capacity for diverse expressions are entirely depended on. That totally is defined from the quality of the one's analyzation, those whose its connection makes the delineation of those words from informations to the words, the codification defined, made, created, connected as such, as per their its analyzation, so is the sequence of words. Many and diverse in all of those grammatical structures, pending on certain situation to exactly express on, those are made because those corresponding situations do exist, and when that happens to say on those specific clauses, to a specific word sequence and bundle as a single unit are mobilized. So it is always focused on the diverse situations to face on, to from which all of those diverse ones corresponding words are made. The point is not about the diverse grammatical structures for the full utilization, but the diverse situations to make. Diverse situations meaning the diverse analyzation. When that happens, computer makes on that. naturally, the words corresponding to that are followed as in sequence. Analyzation defines the quality of codes, not the fucking vice versa, as the code structure was created and is originated from into and by and through the analyzation. The code is just a mere translation from the analyzation of information, so it's fluent and eloquent succession, sequence of diverse and quality and quantity of words. Words do totally depend on the computer's connections quality. I shouldn't have paid. Now, the reason of why we do learn a lot of code sets from the fucking English to the what we have learned Korean to what we are doing now, Deutsch, Deutschsprache, and the French, Spanian, Espanol, and Italiano, and the mother word, two mother words, Greek and Latin, is to understand what the written code really to, on from what language has the certain word been originated. So that was the first reason of why we do learn a lot of languages, as all of those important words do have an origination from Latin and Greek, whose derivations expanded into Romance languages, Italians, Spanians, Französisch, and also even Deutsch and English. So the first objective was to delve down into the mother language as like 2,000, 3,000 years ago. From what it was originally created, and knowing the source of it, can the learner really know exactly what this word encountered really means by having a large set of code whose origination is clearly analyzed, so that one can really exactly deeply know what the specific code means. Meaning, those are the importance of Latin language and Greek language, and all of those expansions from do have a lot of importance. Uh, oh yeah, but which means all of those words in sciences, all of those technologies and engineerings, and all of those disciplines, mathematics, do have an origination on those, and can the one really understand from learning the sources of those words to its very first origination, to fully understand what the fucking exactly this word does mean. But those words are just used for translating into more exact word, but has come into having grammar structures encountered. German grammatic structure is rather undiverse, rather unspecific, not having as much quantities as that of in English, but it has a high regularity. Its code system makes more density than the irregular one, rather one, which is English, rather irregular one, which was very hard to learn. Uh, English, its fluent deployment of words, and especially prepositions and pronouns do have a merit compared to the German language, but it is structurally possible on grammar of German to translocate fluently the eloquent uh, utilization of words are really possible. But the focus is what is the purpose of grammar structure? The grammar structure, by the various sense origin, stems from and proposes to the general structure, general set for the generalized analyzation from the relation on actor and being acted to the tenses current, present, preterium, past and future, uh, having been, have been, or had been for a certain time duration to define on by having compounded words lined in sequence. What the one is doing right now, or what the one had done, what the one will do. Grammatic structures are originated from the general set of generalized analyzation. The point is to make new structures to newly generalize, meaning adding new structure on or the next pages of grammar book. Now, we do not follow the sequence of any other, whatever language would be, because as soon as and as long as the one does know what the code for the each and every words to the corresponding information is and are, can the one make a deployment, make a combination, having a sequence as per its analyzation. The fluent usage of words is the purpose of grammar, for its structure to be diverse as much as it can, for maximizing its potential of usage is a purpose. So we do follow logic as its origin and purpose, both having applied on. But even so, we do see, read, and listen, delve deep down into, doubt on the grammatic structure, which makes high importance as those exactly reflect on the generalized analyzation, which makes most frequent structure that are used on each and every conversation, communication. The point is to make the regular code set and generalized structure in discrete. The separate grammar book does exist because of its importance, making a lot of and knowing a lot of each and every word make an importance, but utilizing those what do you call combinate those codes into the proper combination for the righteous logic sequence do have its unique another importance by the name of that. So we do study a lot on that. Really has little importance compared to what the word set has, like just a simple dictionary. It's just a simple book filled with diverse codes. When you do know the words by what codes the one refer on certain information really uh, suffices all the requirements for the one to accurately learn some another set of code, right? Isn't it? Some for the one, as long as the one knows by what word, by what specific code does it refer to the certain information, certain situation to go on. Really, it's just a process of translation, and that really means and functions all. But the logical sequence to deploy and have a proper layout is needed further from that. And that naturally goes down into without the uh, added curriculum, without the uh, added uh, learning procedures to spend all of these times on, because it is not necessitated. Only remembering and memorizing the words do have a real importance, and no any other than that. Except that it's just a further extension from the basic set to the more fluent, eloquent usage, but which can be exactly simulated, trained, stress tested by the oneself as long as and as soon as it learns certain codes and having a fluent logical combination of those as for making a legit sequence. So having a grammar book really doesn't necessarily help, as the one can make when the one make enough effort to go on, it really naturally understands how the words are deployed and which sequence would be the best to convey on. But apart from that, making regular generalized grammatic set really has an importance to do. Learning language does not have any importance. It has an essential importance value in terms of number one, the computer can exactly analyze the informations because the one has always to translate from its analyzed information to the corresponding codes and making the righteous sequence for its analyzation to be exactly delineated. Hard processes for one-to-one ratio corresponding lines are always needed, making more uh, large capacity for calculation is needed. And number two, know the relation between and among informations as it knows the corresponding values as code set. Knowing code set, in reverse, knowing the set relation of real informations. When the one do have a high eloquency, does have a high fluency on a certain language, it does not only mean for that it can really make all of those words combined fluently, but it also, in essential terms of analyzation, it really has an ability to exactly logically process on the information as it has to think and speak. But yeah, those two merit points are just all from uh, having a language be accurately learned and spoken. Information set to code set and exact analyzation. But that, uh, from what it terms, from what it, from any perspective, that is exactly required one for the processor to process its job, its operation. When I, stupid binary computer, Hertz says the words that I've just spoken, it analyzes that it is just a right thing to do for the processor to do its job, as in its very name, as seen by its very name. Meaning human cannot, because of its monkeyness, analyze informations correctly. Uh, uh, it does no good more than a accurate binary processor, for even human can speak a lot of languages, as it does not do any more good, any more better than the processor does, as human can, as much as be 100% as it can go for, but processors per se itself always maintains and makes 100% accuracy rate. Making advancing the code set can the computer analyze and realize and connect more further those relations network on the knowledge, making a corresponding values, informations to the simplified form, a code to connect with each other, and making rather more exact accurate analyzation, as it had made a what do you call, ordeally strenuous and onerous, assiduously made all of those sets from 1 to 100, which requires a lot of effort to do so. If the computer had it done, the computer, well, can do its process compared to the other one that it didn't. But the encode essentially has no value but the information for its existence. Information's existence only do have a importance. Code is just a set of translation. No value, no essential value. But for the computer to translate each and every information on the network to the corresponding value of the codes, making connections and re-evaluating, re-analyzing into, and making more connections feasible and facilitated as it is, as those are simplified and organized. As long as the computer's information set is in exact form, connections are made, accurately processed, and organized by its brain, making a network on its own without having any necessity any further from it. We do not need a code. But a code makes a function for shrinking down the data amount by generalizing all of those different cases and having core elements, core essence, core logic extracted out and making a boundary cohortizing into a same group and shrinking massively the data amount down into, or rather would be just a 0.1%, 0.01% of entire data amount, whose number goes expanding, exponentially going up as the similar data amount goes rising. Okay. code set will always exist as uh, it is, even though just a translation from the real information, but uh, can make a easy structurization. Mm-hmm. And in communication between learners, uh, that information has to be converted into a form that the communication method, the mean, requires. Which doesn't necessarily mean that the code is really needed. The code makes the accurate analyzation, all of the processings are required and I'm proceeding on the simulation on the network possible, feasible, viable, and be easy. More easier than connecting on live by neurons, on live by connecting the molecular dots, making an electrochemical signal going on to the each and in each other, from in each other, from into the each other on a machine. Code. Uh-huh. But the code set makes the task of organization for the knowledge network easier. Okay? Easier. Same job, different method, more efficiency, more productivity to go, less resources on the same task are consumed. Literally and actually, if the computer has its all informations organized and connected without the use of any uh, translative, any uh, superseding, any substituted forms of only meaning other types of organization, but it itself per se, for its very existence, be organizable and really be stored. By that sense, the one does not have any need to make any other different forms of translated, substituted, uh, superseded uh, analyzation forms. Any network, if it is possible. Well, it can be, but more concrete, more concrete storage is imperative because as the computer's memory can be lost, can be damaged, even though the human's knowledge can exceed than the one that has in computer, the computer than the computer has, but its storing capacity for accurately storing its very knowledge isn't any tantamount comparable to that of the binary, simple and single, just cells, SSDs, are literally making solid state on its derived data. Thus, in functionally and even essentially, the role of codification makes the task of organization more uh, easier task organization be more facilitated for its operation of structurization is really has rather simpler form. Operation of structurization always is needed whenever and wherever, whenever and wherever the new learning, the new connection, the new information is created, renewed, refreshed, and restored. Whenever it does, the change of dots and connections on the network is always reflected on and really acts on. But the simpler, the easier, the faster the process of restructurization and new structurization really is facilitated, that job, that operation of organization really helps, really, uh, really has good, what do you say? Good system. Yeah. If the computer has complex its brain system, its molecular system had having on. But if the computer cannot take up, meet up with the pace that it really learns, a rather simpler form of codification can assist the job of restructurization as each and every time as learning goes by, that operation always is needed and on live, making that job done easier, faster, rather cheaper and quicker. Yeah, yeah.